Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Sixang, and today I'm going to be doing a review on Pokémon FireRed. FireRed along with Leaf Green were the first remakes in the Pokémon series and were developed exclusively for the Game Boy Advance and released in 2004. These remakes were based off of the original Pokémon games known here in the States as Pokémon Red and Blue. In a nutshell, these games are some of the most popular RPGs ever made. They focus on catching Pokémon, battling other trainers, and trading your Pokémon with other players. The games introduced us to the original 151 Pokémon, which includes the likes of Pikachu, Charizard, Mewtwo, etc., and they allowed the player to explore the Kanto region. Pokémon, as you probably already know, is one of the biggest gaming franchises. From the anime to the trading card game, the brand expands far beyond video games. And it's not just popular in the US and Japan, it's global. However, I feel like it's the video games that people are the most opinionated about with this franchise, whether it's the great memories we had as kids, or the rants on not having a complete national dex in Sword and Shield. Fans of the series are very vocal about their thoughts. Personally, I didn't own a Game Boy growing up, so I don't have any hands-on experience with Red and Blue, but I did own the Game Boy Advance, and my first games I played from the franchise were Ruby and Sapphire. These games were known as Gen 3 and included the Hoenn region. Shortly after playing these games, I picked up FireRed and played through the entire game as a kid. So, now playing the game as an adult, what are my opinions on the first Pokémon remake? Let's talk about it. When you begin a new game in FireRed, you are introduced to Professor Oak. Here is where you can select if you're a boy or a girl, the name of your character, and the name of your rival. You start your journey in Pallet Town. This is where you live, and it is also where Professor Oak's laboratory is. Oak provides you with your first Pokémon, but you have the choice to select from a batch of 3. There's Bulbasaur, a grass type, Squirtle, a water type, and Charmander, a fire type. For this playthrough, I selected Charmander, although it was very hard to choose since I love all of the OG starters. After selecting a Pokémon, you have your first battle against the rival character. I named him Gary. The rival will always select whichever Pokémon is strong against your choice. In this case, Gary chose Squirtle since water is super effective against fire types. As you progress through your journey, you'll encounter Gary multiple times, and he's kind of a jerk, so it's fitting that he's your rival. After defeating him, you are now free to explore the Kanto region. There are multiple towns and cities to explore in Kanto, and to get to each one, you have to go through routes. The routes are where you will encounter wild Pokémon as well as other trainers. Battling Pokémon will allow your own Pokémon to gain experience and level up. With wild Pokémon, you also have the opportunity to add them to your team by capturing them with Pokéballs. You can only have 6 Pokémon in your party at a time, but the good news is that all excess Pokémon you own can be digitally transferred and stored in what's called the PC. You'll want to make your Pokémon as strong as possible to progress through the game smoothly. Each new challenge will present you with trainers that are stronger than the previous ones you faced. Ultimately, the main goal is to visit Pokémon gyms where you can battle against gym leaders and earn badges. Gyms are located throughout Kanto, and each gym is unique in terms of what Pokémon you'll face. They will generally favor a certain Pokémon type. For example, Misty's gym in Cerulean City is a water type based gym, so all trainers you face in this gym will most likely have water type Pokémon, including the gym leader. Once you defeat all the gym leaders and collect 8 badges, you can now face the Elite Four, the best Pokémon trainers in all of Kanto. I can tell you how this game ends, but this was just me summarizing how the main plot of the game unfolds. Now, let's go deeper into the topics of this game as well as some of the pros and cons with FireRed. Since this is a remake and explores the first generation of Pokémon, I felt a lot of nostalgia playing through it. To me, this generation is iconic since it includes the first batch of Pokémon ever introduced, and it allows you to explore the Kanto region. Maybe it's just a me thing, but a lot of my nostalgia with this game comes from watching the anime. A lot of the characters in the game appear in the show, like Professor Oak, Gary, Brock, and Misty to name a few. Obviously there's no Ash since you're the protagonist, but the characters are something I feel like I care about more because of the show. You'll notice I haven't mentioned the bad guys or the evil faction, Team Rocket, and that's because to me, I didn't feel like they were that integral to the game. Yeah, the leader Giovanni is the 8th gym leader, which is supposed to be a surprise, but other than that, I feel like Team Rocket is lackluster in this game. Other entries in the series do better with villains and their organizations in my opinion. Just throwing it out there, but it may have helped to have had Jesse, James, and Meowth appear in the game. Ever hear the catchphrase, gotta catch 'em all? Well, one of the main gameplay features of these games is the Pokédex. Although not integral to completing the game, The Pokédex is a device that collects and logs info on all Pokémon you capture. Players can make it an objective to complete the Pokédex, and the reward for completing it varies from game to game. However, a staple of Pokémon games and their different versions are version-exclusive Pokémon. There are some Pokémon only available in FireRed and not Leaf Green, and vice versa. Examples for FireRed exclusives include Psyduck and Scyther. So even if you wanted to complete the Pokédex, you would either need to trade with a friend or own the other version of the game. Related to the Pokédex, I want to talk about the variety with wild Pokémon in FireRed. I mentioned briefly that you encounter Pokémon on routes, but there's also caves, water, fishing, etc. Even with the variety of ways to encounter Pokémon, the kinds of Pokémon you encounter can get very repetitive. On one hand, this isn't really the fault of the game, but rather the fact that the amount of available Pokémon in Gen 1 is small compared to newer titles in the series. When you think about it, it's very easy now for the developers to provide a variety of different Pokémon because they include Pokémon from previous generations. The Achilles heel to this argument though is the Safari Zone. The Safari Zone is an area in the game focused on just capturing Pokémon. No battling, just catching. You are given 30 Safari Pokeballs to use at will when capturing Pokémon in this area. When encountering Pokémon, you can decide to throw a bait or a rock at them. Yes, you heard that right, you can throw rocks at Pokémon. The bait makes it less likely that Pokémon will flee, but it increases your chances of catching it. Throwing rocks increases your chances of catching it, but also increases the chance of it fleeing. The reason I say this is the Achilles heel is because there are so many Pokémon that are exclusive to the Safari Zone that I feel like they could have just been regular wild Pokémon. Rather than encountering a billion Pidgeys and Rattatas, it would have been nice to find something like a Scyther in the wild. Oh yeah, and to top it off, Pokemon like Scyther and Chansey have super low encounter rates, so if you find one in the Safari Zone, you're super lucky. Until you realize actually catching it is next to impossible. Next, let's talk about the actual difficulty of the game. You may think Pokemon is a baby game and is super easy to progress through, but if you've played this game, you know that's definitely not true. The scaling of difficulty in FireRed can be pretty intense, especially if you're not grinding your Pokemon to level up. You'll notice that some of the quote-unquote boss enemies like Gary and the gym leaders are far stronger than the trainers you encounter in the wild. This can be both a good and a bad thing. The good thing about this is that they're actually tough battles and you won't just steamroll them to victory. The bad thing is you'll have to sometimes backtrack and grind out your Pokemon so that they're competent enough to take on these trainers. In my opinion, one of the biggest gauges to your progression is actually Gary. Gary will show up at random throughout your journey and truly test your Pokemon. A lot of the times, he's higher level than the actual gym leaders, but his team stays relatively the same throughout the game, so you'll know how to counter him. And one last tidbit about battling. Do you like status effects, specifically getting poison? Then this game is for you. I didn't notice it as much later in the game, but early on, this is super annoying. You'll encounter all types of status effects like getting paralyzed, getting frozen, put to sleep, etc. But arguably, the worst one is when your Pokemon gets confused, which isn't even a real status effect. My words of advice, make sure to stock up on full heals. So, what happens once you reach the Elite Four? Well, first you have to travel down Victory Road, a cave area that includes some of the toughest trainers and Pokemon the game has to offer. Once you get through it though, you can now challenge the Elite Four. Each trainer has a type preference, similar to the gym leaders. The types are Ice, Fighting, Ghost, and Dragon. I'll tell you right now, I was very underleveled and didn't pack enough revives, but I managed to cheese my way through. After defeating the Elite Four, there is still one last trainer to face, the Champ. And can you guess who it is? Of course, it's our old pal Gary. His team doesn't have a type preference, but the Pokemon he has are nearly identical to the ones you've faced before. I barely beat Gary, but as Vin Diesel would say,
it don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning.
Once you beat him, you are granted the title of Pokemon League Champion. And shortly after, the credits roll. But this isn't actually the end of the game. There's tons of post-game content to explore. And this is also another staple of the Pokemon series. Professor Oak will provide you with the National Dex, a Pokédex that allows you to log Pokemon from the other regions, Johto and Hoenn. Also, you can now capture Mewtwo, have a chance encounter with one of the 3 legendary dogs, and explore more islands. You can pour hours and hours into these Pokemon games, which is one of the reasons why many people enjoy them. Now, if you have experience playing Ruby and Sapphire, you'll notice that the overall interface of these games looks very similar, and that's because they are. The FireRed and Leaf Green games use a modified engine of Ruby and Sapphire, hence the similar styles. They also have cross-compatibility as well, which has been a hallmark of the Pokemon series. This is very useful when working on the national deck, since it's impossible to catch all the Pokemon in a singular game. This ties into another point I want to make in general about the GBA era. There was so much compatibility between Nintendo devices at the time. From the link cable to the Game Boy player on the GameCube, it truly made Pokemon feel like a complete experience. Personally, I would transfer Pokemon from Pokemon Coliseum to my GBA games all the time using the link cable, and it was always so nice to pop in a cartridge to the GameCube and play GBA games on the TV. I think above all, one of the craziest Pokemon features in my mind was when Diamond and Pearl came out for the DS. They had a feature that allowed you to transfer Pokemon using the GBA slot on the DS, no other equipment required. This blew my mind as a kid, and although the transfer process was a bit gimmicky, the fact that there was a way to make this work was awesome. It's crazy how the Kanto region introduced us players to the first 151 Pokemon, and that was all we knew. Now, that number is all the way up to 905, with new Pokemon games, Scarlet and Violet, right around the corner. I've played through essentially every mainline Pokemon game since Ruby and Sapphire, and it's awesome to see how much the series has grown. I'm always excited to jump into new regions and experience catching new Pokemon, and having played FireRed, it really puts it all into perspective. I honestly don't remember struggling as much with the game as a kid, but it probably helped that I had a lot more time back then to grind and level up my Pokemon. I'm not gonna lie though, I could have spent a lot more time with this playthrough and had a smoother run through the Elite Four, but the challenge of going through underleveled was kinda fun. Honestly, I don't think this is the best Pokemon game in the series, but the charm of Gen 1 and all it has to offer was very fun for me. And that's gonna do it for this one. In the future, I plan on reviewing the other mainline Pokemon games, so be sure to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Gen 1 Pokemon is. And if you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Sixsang for updates and funny posts. Thank you so much for watching, hope you tune into the next one, and have a great rest of your day. Peace.